Since Bartholomew Diaz managed to circumnavigate the Cape in 1488 in an attempt to find a sea route to the spicelands of East Asia, numerous Dutch ships called Indiamen dared the demanding route to East Asia in their relatively ill-equipped vessels. They used navigational instruments that could not meet the challenge of the oceans. The area immediately surrounding the Cape was particularly treacherous. Officially known as the Cape of Good Hope or Cabo do Bono Esperano, this route was soon renamed the Cape of Storms as countless Indiamen ran aground or suffered shipwreck while negotiating the route around the Cape Peninsula. They were generally hoping to barter fresh meat and water from the indigenous people who lived on the peninsula. On March 25th, 1647, the Dutch Indiaman, the Nui Haarlem, one of the fleet of the Indiamen, was wrecked in a storm in Table Bay. At first, this shipwreck seemed much less dramatic than the countless ships that had run aground before it. No crew person was killed and the invaluable cargo could be salvaged. However, this shipwreck was destined to change the course of history, leading to the creation of a new state of the southern part of the African continent. The captain of the New Harlem instructed a junior merchant, Lender Jazzen, to remain behind with approximately 60 crewmen to look after the cargo that could not be loaded onto the remaining vessels of the fleet that was returning to Holland. Jansen built a temporary fortification of a crew and cargo. He waited for about a year before he and his crew were taken on board by the homeward bound fleet under the Willenbrod Gelency de Jong. During the waiting period, Jansen and his crew grew vegetables, bartered fresh meat from the peninsula koi people, and fished. Upon his return to Holland, Jansen and a fellow officer, Nicholas Prout, were required by the Dutch East Indian Company of the VOC Directorate to compile a report on the visibility of the Cape for a refreshment station, an idea that had been mooted decades earlier. Jansen and Prout compiled the report and handed it to the Directorate in 1649 as an official document called the Remonstrante. In this report, Jansen recommended the suitability of the Cape for a refreshment state. He pointed out its strategic location, the fertility of the land, and the abundance of fish, and most importantly, the lack of animosity towards strangers from the indigenous people. Jan van Riebeck, who was on the fleet that repatriated Jansen and his crew, was asked to comment on the remonstrante. He supported Jansen in all aspects. The Victorian of the VOC approved the remonstrante in 1650, and a year later, in 1651, the Amsterdam Chamber of the VOC sent Van Riebeck to establish the refreshment station at the Cape. Van Riebeck landed in Table Bay in 1652 to execute this project. The Remonstrante, which is housed in the Cape Town Archives Repository, is regarded as the oldest written public, that is, governmental or official archival record of the region that was to become known as South African State. Van Riebeck brought it along with a set of instructions for setting up a refreshment station. On a final note, it has to be said that, far from being developed as merely a refreshment station, the Cape began the gateway to colonialism of the entire region as far as north the Orange and Limpopo rivers.